Yeah, this is the Pulling the Thread podcast, and today I'm interviewing former pastor Mark Peralta. He is the co-host of the Apostate of Mind podcast, and we're going to talk about his journey into and out of Christianity. I always like to start it off by asking about your background. What was your religious upbringing? What brought you to Christianity in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Jeramiah, and thank you for hosting me and inviting me. Honestly, I'm honored to be here and be able to get to share this with you and with your audience. But yeah, I mean, long story short, in terms of my religious upbringing, I was, you could say, born and raised Catholic up until I became a teenager, where I went through the different sacraments like baptism and communion and stuff. And then as an adult, I sort of like got away from the church, and this was back down in South America where I grew up in Colombia. But then once we migrated to the States, Catholicism sort of became more a background thing in my life. And then I started attending an evangelical church, when I was like maybe in my late teens, early 20s. So that by the time I meet my wife, and she's got more of an evangelical background, we were very quick we were sold with the whole argument, like, you need God for your relationship to work and for your marriage to last. So we pursued God heavily. So we went to the church. This is where we end up at Covenant Church now in Carrollton, Texas, where I hear the gospel. We both heard the gospel pretty clear and professed our faith publicly. So we went through like a believer's baptism. And then within a year's time, I was very, very passionate about learning the Bible already. Like, I felt like Sunday after Sunday, I was being just fed all this wisdom, but I needed more. I felt like I needed to really get to know and understand, because you'd hear the preacher talk about like, in the original language, and he would quote the Greek and he would say this and that. And so I'm like, all right, so there's more to it, right? So I joined Bible college. I pursued an undergraduate degree. I graduated in Dallas Baptist University with an undergrad degree in biblical studies, along with a pre-medical degree, which it's sort of kind of like what I've always done is I've worked in healthcare, mainly in dentistry. And but I just really wanted to learn the Bible and theology and all that stuff. And by graduation, I changed my mind, because I was originally pursuing a dental degree. I wanted to go to dental school. I did all my prerequisites. I mean, everything that you got to go through. And graduation, this was December 2012. It was, 2009. I felt the calling. So I'm like, oh no, I've got to go to seminary. I feel like this is so good and I want to be a professor. So my undergrad in a DBU exposed me from preachers to professors. And that was like, wow, that's what I want to do. So I sought a seminary degree and achieved it over at Dallas Theological Seminary. So now I'm like another 5 years into this pursuit. And then,
So I got some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Covenant Church is not Baptist.
No.
They believe in healing, laying on of hands, and stuff like that. How did you square that? Yeah, because I guess you're Catholic, and then you guys went to Covenant Church, and then you're at a Baptist college. before we jump into that, I got a question. So you guys got baptized at Covenant Church. Did you guys get married at Covenant Church or go through premarital counseling there? Or
No, when we met, we were both unchurched. And at Covenant, I think we just kind of heard the gospel there, and we were there for maybe a couple of years, but then we moved, and then we stopped going to Covenant. We attended, from then on, it was mostly non-denominational churches that we attended to that were not necessarily Baptist, no. And I didn't really care much for denomination and whatnot. I became a pretty serious fundamentalist, 5-point Calvinist.
okay.
So I just gravitated to Baptist theology. And then the church that I actually worked for, because we served for years in various churches, but this one that I worked for, even though they're not branded as a Baptist church, I understood that the tradition and the church model that they were following was pretty much Southern Baptist. It just wasn't that really, it was not like, it didn't really belong to the convention. But I'd say in terms of theology and practice, they were pretty much that.
Okay.
That tradition.
Yeah. When I was engaged, we started out at Covenant Church doing premarital counseling. They had very overhanded discipleship, very involved in your personal life. I was uncomfortable with it. I kind of wanted to have like a Jewish experience more for my family and whatnot. And so we ended up going to Baruch Hashem. Intersection, like, we both went to Covenant Church, probably at different times. I think at Covenant Church, I was probably, 2006, 2007. I don't know what time you guys were there. But yeah, we had been involved with the ministry there for a little bit. So that's why it's kind of interesting, your guys' story, because like we kind of weave in and out some same places and then go through this deconstruction, deconversion kind of thing. So you were in more of a Baptist kind of thing, and Calvinist. So you didn't really see much of a transition between that. Did you really adhere to the kind of evangelical charismatic as much, or that
No. No. So like DTS was a great fit for me because I came to the conclusion that I was very much a cessationist in that sense. So I did not really care for the preaching in tongues that was going on in Covenant. And so, yeah, maybe that's why we kind of started trying out different places. So you've got like the Village Church is another one that we stuck in for quite a bit. And they were formerly known as the Village Baptist Church, or the First Baptist Church, the Village or something. And then this gentleman, the main preacher there, he changed the name, and they changed preachers, and then everything was different. But I'd say that the theology and the mindset was very much still kind of a Baptist church.
Okay. So your experience when you went to Bible college. So I went to Southwestern Assembly's God University, and they had this thing like Ring by Spring or Your Money Back. It was very much get an education, find a wife, get in the ministry kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
So what was your experience like in, getting your bachelor and master's degree? Because you got an MDiv in theology or something, right?
Not an MDiv, but an MA in biblical studies. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I originally had signed up for the Masters of Theology. And in fact, I've got all the credits for it because I did all the languages and did all my systematic theology classes. I ended up with more credits than I really, should have, because I kind of changed midway. I felt like being the fundamentalist that I was, when I'm now having to read like contemporary theologians, for like in advanced systematic theology classes, I was really bored and like I didn't care for it. You know, like for example, one of those that I remember, Karkanian, forgot his first name. He's got one of those textbooks that they have you read on the Trinity, and his model is weird. And so I was really turned off by the contemporary theology and the lack of demand for fundamentalist theologians out there writing books. It just seemed like if I was going to engage a PhD on a course with a PhD, I really wanted to pursue the PhD because I wanted to teach. I felt like I was more suitable for the biblical studies. So I changed my degree. I changed my mind. And so I fell in love with the languages and translation. So I'm a bit of a polyglot in the sense that I'm fluent in Spanish, English, Italian. I could understand Portuguese, and then of course Hebrew and Greek and a little bit of Aramaic. And so that just gravitated more towards the languages and felt more inspired by language professors than by my theologians. So, yeah.
Yeah, like you, I'm probably, I guess, a polyglot. I mean, English, Hebrew, Greek. I've studied various Semitic languages, Aramaic, Akkadian, and then other languages through like martial arts and other things that I do. But
Oh yeah, I saw that you do Krav Maga and other stuff, huh?
yes, that's a whole nother thing. But yes, I teach martial arts as one of my other hats that I wear. But yes. So
That's really cool. We've done Krav Maga training, my wife and I. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, I mean, one of those things. It's I've done martial arts since I was a little kid, and something I enjoy doing. But
nice.
I have a YouTube channel for that. That's totally different than this one. So, but anyways, so yeah, you went to Bible college, and then I mean, you didn't buy into the theology because when I went to Southwestern, it was the Assemblies of God, so it's Pentecostal, but they preach their theological statements, and all theological treatises are eisegesis through text. A bunch of verses, you got to believe this, we're going to force it to fit. And I was, in quite a few conversations with professors where they're like, one of the final ones I remember having, and it was in I believe it was my Old Testament survey class, but he was like, you probably should go your own way. Like, you're not built for the Assemblies of God kind of thing. Was there, other than, because you mentioned the statement of faith, essentially, were there other things in your experience, whether it was like in Bible college, that you started to question?
A little bit, yeah. So when I learned of the documentary hypotheses, I was a little shocked. And then later, the synoptic problem of the Gospels also shocked me a little bit. So I mean, I just continued beyond seminary to engage with the books. And while I was there, I bought a lot of commentaries and books in that, criticism, like textual criticism and books on grammar and all that stuff that you get when you're learning the languages. And I just kept on reading. And
like, what scholars were you gravitating towards at that time?
At that time, so I was reading like the local guys. But for me, it was mostly like, I'm already forgetting like who I was reading at the time, but I was deep into Calvinism, so I'm reading the Institutes a lot. And then and I would buy just commentary. So I would go to the store and I would research which, were the kinds of commentaries that I gravitated towards, and I went and tried to amass, a decent library for me to have, like those textbooks. But outside of like, DTS profs, I engaged Ehrman a little bit because I took a class that was about, yeah, it was not an introduction to the Gospels, but it was more like one of those socio-cultural type of surveys. I forget the name of this guy, but they had me read the the New Testament introduction by Bob Ehrman.
Okay.
And so I was really interested on like why he was saying what he was saying about the reliability and the historicity issues about Jesus and all that stuff. So, but very little. I mean, I'm still like very much like, a believer. I'm still like sold for Christ. And my last year, I took a job as a minister. And so that was my next experience.
Okay.
And
So
that
yeah,
one, yeah.
go ahead. So yeah, what was your experience like? All right, so you got involved in ministry. What was your experience like there?
So I was hired as an associate pastor, which made me responsible for basically making sure that there were people on the pews on Sunday. So whatever I needed to do, whether that was like evangelism, but mostly I'm like helping out with like stage design and leading all of like the volunteer teams for Sunday and coordinating with everybody and stuff, audio. I would prepare slides for every Sunday. And then on occasion, I was preaching. So he would put me in a rotation, but I was not preaching every Sunday. I was in charge of the Lord's Supper and kind of like the rituals during the service for the most part. And overall, it was a decent experience. But there were a couple of things that really bothered me a lot. One was the main audio guy once got on my face because he didn't like that I had complained to him about some choir risers, which was just a misunderstanding. And he was, I don't know, maybe he didn't really like me, or I don't know. He was kind of weird. And he's like on my face Sunday morning, 10 minutes before the beginning of service. And the outcome of that was me getting scolded by my supervisor, who was the main pastor of the Hispanic ministry. Mm-hmm. And then his supervisor, which is the worship pastor, because of my attitude. Like they completely turned it on me. I felt like it was not like a deal breaker, like I'm leaving or anything. I was just very shocked as to how my supervisor reacted when I was the ones to like sort of raise the flag, because I came to him. I was like, hey, this happened to me and this dude did this. And I felt like that was very inappropriate. Like have a discussion with me, disagree with me, be angry at me or feel angry, but getting up on my face in a threatening way with like making a fist, like, how dare you, kind of. I felt that was uncalled for in a church. And then I'm the one who's getting scolded for how I treated him according to him. But no big deal. Ministry continued on. At the end of that first year, we had like the church has, the meeting at the end of the year with the elders, and we went on a retreat where we did all this brainstorming for the next year and what was needed, what worked out, what didn't work out. And one of the things that I had been sort of like a leading voice of what we need to do for next year. One of the things we must do is hire a full-time worship pastor for the Hispanic ministry, because at the time we just had a volunteer dude who was great, but the ministry really lacked quality. And as I was responsible for the ultimate outcome and all that stuff in terms of the service, I felt like that was the right thing to do. And I championed that idea, and it came to be where like most people had agreed. So anyway, we go out on a vacation. We take a few days off, and then we come back. And then it was like Tuesday or Wednesday of that week back. He's like, "Hey, we need to sit down and talk with Daniel, who's one of the elders, and something we want to talk to you about. Can you be there in like about 10 minutes?" I'm like, "Okay." And it was really weird because we ran pretty like tight schedules, and we coordinated things pretty well. So impromptu meetings like that didn't take place often. So I was really weird. And then coming to find out, they're letting me go because they're wanting to hire a full-time worship pastor, and they felt like, well, they said that the budget couldn't really afford both, and that the greater need was the worship minister, and that our congregation was perhaps not ready to do all that. And kind of in a way say, and then they mentioned how you yourself agree, but even though I didn't agree to that, I thought that it was a good idea for us to hire a worship pastor, but not letting me go in the process. And so I'm kind of still processing the situation, and then they handed me a piece of paper, and then they were like, "Hey, by the way, we want to like say goodbye, give you a proper goodbye on Sunday. And so could you make sure to be there and like, bring your wife and kids, so we can give you a proper goodbye. And by the way, here's what we want you to talk about." And so they handed me a piece of paper that had a paragraph of my explanation for why I was departing. And coming to find out, it didn't spell the truth. It said that I was leaving because I was pursuing other interests, that had other interests in ministry, and being an associate pastor at this church was not that. And so that I was leaving. And rather than putting my foot down and saying, screw you, I'm not going to lie, I went along with it. And we read that on Sunday, that weekend. Part of me said, well, what alternatives do I have? If I don't show up on Sunday, people could assume that something was wrong that I had something to do with, or that my leaving had something to do with something about me, when it very much indeed was not the case. Or do I stand up and tell the truth and then expose this and maybe create some sort of drama or bring about drama? Or just go along with it. And we went along with it. We left church that Sunday, and I felt like a prisoner being let go from jail as I was walking away. And I didn't leave church. We didn't leave church saying to ourselves, this is the last time we step a foot inside a church, although we should have, but we didn't. We kept an open mind. And then for a couple of years, we gave ourselves a little bit of time to process everything. And we tried going back to church. At first, it was very clear we were very burnt out from this whole experience. And it made it very challenging for us to be at any service anywhere. And then gradually it became clear that we just didn't want to be in church anymore. Like, this was ridiculous.
So in that process,
that was the extent of, go ahead.
In that process there, had you become aware of manipulation tactics within the ministry, whether it be through music? I've heard a few different music leaders say that you you gotta basically get them into the spirit through worship to make them more, I can't think of the way that it was said right now, but more acceptable to the word or more suggestible.
Yeah.
Are you aware of, did you become aware of manipulation tactics within
Mhm.
the ministry and the church? And can you kind of give some illustrations of that?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a good question, Jeremiah. For me, so I'm not an expert on music per se, although I am a musician.
Mhm.
It's just not my expertise. But there is something about like wavelengths and sound waves and frequencies that can make people feel certain things. So, for example, in during the Middle Ages, the church figured out that the taller the ceiling of the church, the more ominous and the more echo and the more a different experience is generated just by the architecture of the church ceiling, in that it creates sort of like a reverb effect on any sound wave, and reverb can trick space. So how close a sound you experience it to you with respect to where you are. And so there are certain frequencies that, I think this is where, I'm not sure if it's by design, but I think that worship ministers that know what they're doing, they are utilizing like the synthesizers and the bass when they transition between songs, and there's sort of like, or there's a moment when is specifically dedicated to like praying, or they making altar calls. You
Mhm.
notice the music changes and it feels like something's filling the room, but
Mhm.
it's not like there's a spirit there. It's that is being created by the sound frequencies, by the energy, by the voice of whoever's on. And I was terrible at that. I'll
Mhm.
admit to this. I was a terrible preacher because I never preached. I got up there to teach, but
Right.
I hated preaching and I hated the whole stuff. But I did it anyway to the best of my ability. But all that is just put on, and so you could notice, you can pick up the differences. Like if you visit different churches, you'll experience different feelings, not because the message is different, not because the people are different, not because that God is there or is not there, but because they have a synthesizer and they've got like multi-million-dollar audio equipment, and they've
Yeah.
got musicians that are professionals, that are doing this and creating these atmospheric experiences.
Yeah. So a very
Um,
performative worship experience.
right.
Um, Something I mentioned to your wife when I was doing the podcast with her. Um, like the pastor at the church that I worked at, we had to have the AC set at 72 degrees because that facilitated the filling of the Holy Spirit. I didn't know
Temperature.
the Holy Spirit needed the help of an air conditioning unit, but apparently he did. Um, so
Oh yeah.
in this process, you started to question um, your belief in God. You mentioned the document hypothesis and the synoptic problem. I mean, so you're on your way out. You're noticing, the ingredients that make the soup, as I would say, like what makes up,
Yeah.
the services. It's a contrived thing. What's leading you in the direction? Like, how do you guys, once you went back the second time, how do you end up leaving the church? And what set you on the journey of where you're at now?
So we tried a few times and it just didn't feel right. Didn't feel like something we wanted to plug in. We knew that the key to living that Christian life was relationships and being part of like small groups and living Christian with others, right? Living that with other people. And and that's really how like we experienced church for the most part, is we were always that couple hosting um other families at our place and organizing this and, barbecues and all that. We were always doing that kind of thing. And so we went back looking for that community again, and we didn't find it. There was always something that went wrong, like either the group got canceled or the schedules were weird, or in the case of the village church, in many times there was no room. There was like all the small groups are maxed out. And so we had that a few times, and it just didn't feel like things were working out. Not only that, but we then tried serving, and we just felt like we were amongst other hypocrites. Like, it's just, people had personal agendas, and it just doesn't seem right. And so then we never went back. We started I felt like, okay, so maybe we're just pursuing the wrong model. Maybe we need to kind of try more of a home church thing, more of a kind of, I don't know, something more primitive, and maybe we could just do church ourselves. And we would just get together sometimes and talk about, I try to teach the Bible to my kids and do all that. So we continued on living that life, but then right around the pandemic hit, I got really into watching YouTube videos because I do woodworking. And so I got into that. And then for some reason, I started watching The Atheist Experience. And then a lot of stuff started making sense. Matt Dillahunty started making a lot of sense. Christopher Hitchens, oh my gosh. He was making so much sense, because when I was in DTS, I took a few courses in philosophy as part of my degree, and maybe a couple of electives. So I did a semester in Intro to Philosophy and then Logic. And I did another semester in Epistemology. Logic for me was like maybe the most important one, because there I was exposed to things like fallacies, understanding the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning, how science is working, how religion is arguing, and I was exposed to the arguments. And even though while I was in seminary, I was still believing those concepts of logic, like, the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, like that kind of stuff, or in like exegetical fallacies. And just all kinds of ways that language can be manipulated to say something else or to convince you of something that may not necessarily be true. And just, how people debate and argue for things like the existence of God and Christianity and all that kind of stuff. So when I'm hearing the other side speaking on the matter, I'm like, he's right. And so that's why I'm like, we started deconstructing. I started deconstructing from a belief in God, along with just not trusting that this book that I had taught for years, that was the divinely inspired word of a God, and that it's true and that it's inerrant and all that stuff, that perhaps I've been fooled, and perhaps it's not. And so, yeah, that's when it started going downhill for me.
So the inerrancy of Scripture became like a major, I guess, a turning point for you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was there any specific passages or anything within, I guess the reliability of it?
Mm-hmm.
Were you presented with any of that in Bible college? You did in Bible college. You mentioned the document hypothesis. They were talking about that at the time, right?
Yeah, it was part of one of those Bible exposition courses that it was a Genesis through Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Course, I think, in the prof, he talked about it, and he just sort of presented it. He never like tried to force us to see it one way or another. Mm-hmm. Although DTS has that legacy of inerrancy, like Norman Geisler and those guys that have been kind of pushing that for a while.
Yeah, because I was presented
Yeah.
with the document hypothesis when I was at Southwestern. And of course the problem with the synoptics and stuff. It's funny how they try to harmonize the New Testament despite its many contradictions.
Right.
But yeah, for a while I studied a lot of ancient Near East, studied a bit of Akkadian, Sumerian. I'm part of a Jewish tradition that more secular and scholarly, that we accept the document hypothesis and the cultural framework of where all this stuff came from. So it's
Yeah.
but people who hold to an inerrancy of scripture, there's a problem with that. With the New Testament, Bart Ehrman estimates there's up to 500,000 textual variants amongst 5,800 manuscripts. Scholars say that there's between 5,000 and 20,000 textual variants in, between the Tanakh. So, I mean, these texts aren't exact. I mean, it's not possible to be inerrant and have that many errors, right? So when apologists and stuff start saying that, I have a hard time with evangelicals and Catholics and Christian theologians who will even acknowledge the textual variants, which is funny. Okay, so I'm trying to think. Nestle Rand, they said that essentially each page of their text is a 40% error rate. They admit, now they say it's a 60%. They don't say it in the negative, they say it in the positive, that it's a 60% accuracy. So that's supposed to be good. But then I've seen people who parse the numbers. If you take 5,800 texts by 500,000 errors, that's like an 80%, 83% error rate. And then I've seen people try to fudge the numbers and flip it and say it's a 90% accuracy rate. And there's just these weird things like that they do to explain away the historical evidence, the facts, anything that's not based in history, archaeology, is very questionable. And I asked your wife about this. Do you believe in a historical Jesus or the Christ myth theory? Because I've had people who are on both sides of the fence. I've had Robert Price on. I've had a few other people who James Stephen Valiant, who did Creating Christ. So where do you fall? Is there a historical Jesus, Christ myth? I mean, what is your perspective on that?
Okay. Yeah, that seems to be the question now. So I'm a little in between. I'm in one sense, I find no problem conceding that there was Jesus, Yeshua of Nazareth, that existed, and that perhaps this dude was some teacher that said some stuff and became somehow popularized. But then I don't accept the claims of the New Testament about this guy, like the resurrection, the ascension, the whole divinity stuff. So I think in that sense, I do believe in a historical Jesus. I just don't accept the claims. I am a little concerned, though, about when you look at the so-called contemporary witnesses outside of the New Testament, what they actually say, like Suetonius, and Josephus is something else, because there's even doubt that whether or not
the Flavian testimony of Flavian in Josephus is Eusebius put that in there probably.
Yeah, so that interpolation or whatever, that seems to be the likely thing. And it wouldn't surprise me that something like that would be done to help support that new religion.
Yeah.
And so when you read the other guys, what they actually do say about this Jesus is all very negative. It's not like anything that corroborates the resurrection, for example. It's nothing that would corroborate even crucifixion, maybe. It's just a thing where, like, there were this guy and then these people and they were causing trouble and and that sort of thing. And then everything else is just like post second, third century AD. So you can't really trust that for anything. But then the other thing is the lack of other contemporary historians that should have or would have mentioned something if this was actually a real thing, that didn't say anything.
I mean, if you think about it, if a God died and rose from the dead, I think everybody'd be talking about this. I mean, if that was what happened, I mean, it would be hard to keep that a lid on that, right? If that's what actually happened.
That's right. And yeah, and then especially if that guy was walking around for 40 days and whatnot, and then that they actually do see him go up in the sky. But yeah, you don't have, so what you do have is either questionable or it doesn't really bring anything to the table other than simply corroborate of Jesus, which in some texts, in some of those sources, it doesn't even say Jesus. It says like Christus.
And it's not even spelled the same. It's spelled with an E, not an I. And,
right.
And there was a Egyptian movement, follower of Christos, and his followers were called Christians with the E, not the I. And Celsus was probably talking about Christos, the Egyptian, not the New Testament one. But, and there, I've seen works that argue that. You mentioned something, the resurrection and ascension. The oldest extant manuscripts that we have of Mark, there is no virgin birth and there is no resurrection. And a lot of that stuff was added 4th, 5th, 6th century, some of it even in the 8th century. Like it wasn't until after the 4th century there was some redaction going on early on, but a lot of the big theological things were like post-Nicene is when they start showing up. Codex Sinaiticus, they date it from 325 to like 360. That version of Mark doesn't have the virgin birth or the resurrection, and Acts doesn't have an ascension account in it. So I mean, all of that wasn't even in there. The unique son of God, a lot of those claims were downplayed too. The Son of Man stuff does come from a tradition. There was some of that Son of Man stuff, but the stuff attaching him, as unique son, the First John 1, what I'm trying to think of the verse where they put the Trinity. What that one wasn't put in until the 8th century. The one that's in the King James Bible. Was it?
And I think Tobias Singer, doesn't he say that puts the nail in the coffin of son of a virgin?
Yeah,
because it's like it's literally telling you he's the son of a man. He has to be a son of a man.
Yeah.
And I agree with him on many things as well. I don't agree with on everything that he says, but some of those things I do.
Did you see the podcast I just put out where I interviewed him?
No, I did not, but I'm gonna look it up because I'm gonna watch it. I watch everything he puts out.
So
almost everything.
Yeah. So we talk about the historical Jesus, and there's some really interesting stuff you'll probably find interesting in there. So
I've read both his Let's Get Biblical volumes. So I really enjoy his work.
There is a kind of a consensus within the historical Jesus community that the Jewish view of Jesus is probably the historical view of Jesus. Now, the only thing that scholars in general, like most historical Jesus scholars, agree on is he was baptized by John and he was crucified. There are some people who think it was where he swooned and he was put in a cave, but then he woke up because he wasn't fully dead when they took him off the cross. It's called the Christ swoon theory. Honestly, we weren't there, so I don't know. But it's hard to, to judge sources. The interesting thing that Rabbi Tovia Singer said is that there are some elements in the gospel, the, embarrassing things. It's hard to manufacture embarrassing things. Why would they put it in, the New Testament if it was made up? Because you want to make your person look, better than, the stories of walking on water and stuff like that was added to make him sound like a divine being, or something special. The pure pericope adulterae, the one the first, I'm gonna mess it up right now, but he was without
of
sin,
the adulteress.
cast the first stone. That's at 20 different places within the manuscripts, and it's not in the earliest manuscripts. And from what I hear, or from my research, that's actually something that Marcion, he invented that pericope, and they were trying to find a place to put it within the text. But yeah, I had a very interesting podcast that's going to go live with Dr. Price about Marcion and his influence on what became the New Testament. What is your theory, I guess, your working theory of the historical Jesus, the New Testament?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, I do agree with that first there was Mark, and that then Matthew and Luke came later. Perhaps Luke first, and then Matthew comes in. As I noticed, Matthew seems to be addressing Luke at times, or correcting him, or saying less or more. So there seems to be a little bit of an interaction, which kind of tells me that Matthew may have come after Luke, but I'm not sure. And John is just something else.
So the first community to widely distribute the Gospel of John was Marcion's community. And it was after the first New Testament that we have, well, I would say that has a gospel and epistles was produced by Marcion. The first one we have a record of is Marcion's version of Luke and his collection of the Pauline epistles. Before that, we don't have a whole gospel epistle tradition. His community, out of that, they were the first to widely distribute the Gospel of John. And there are different theories on who invented the Gospel of John. I believe it was, some say a Johannine community. I think it was Marcion's community, because it really elevated him to that apotheosis, to that divine status. I mean, that's kind of like my working theory of, and I would go with what Robert Price was saying, is that Marcion's gospel was before Mark and inspired Mark, and the proto-Orthodox harmonized that more with Catholic or Orthodox views. And then so you have Mark, and then Luke, and Matthew, and then John. But I mean, that's kind of a working theory I have on how those came to be, because we have an earlier gospel sayings tradition, whether that's the Q hypothesis. I've seen some references to potentially an early version of Thomas being an early Q source. But of course, there's differences there. So the Gnostic Thomas we have is not what would have been the early Thomas it might have been. But there was a diversity of gospels and epistles early on. There wasn't a unified belief. But I mean, what do you think about that kind of?
Yeah, theory? I can see that. I don't think that there's any evidence though for a Marcion text or a Q text, but there seems to be enough.
No, we actually have Marcion's gospel and epistles, but it's a version of Luke, and it's a collection of I think it's 10 of Paul's epistles. Yeah.
Is that in Greek or is that in Latin?
It's in Greek.
It's in Greek. Okay. Yeah,
But
I mean,
that's the
whichever
first
way.
actual gospels and epistles
Mhm.
that we have copies of are his version. Now, of course, everybody says there's earlier traditions, we just don't have the copies. So yes, it's possible he just changed them. And there are earlier versions of Luke and the epistles of Paul.
Mhm.
But that's our first collection that we have is Marcion. Um, but then of course there's the proto-Orthodox then had their versions, and that became the main view because they the editing and redaction of the text. They had to harmonize it with their view because Marcion's view was very like he rejected the Old Testament, and his view was not their view.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So some of the things that concern me the most
Mm.
are things like when they're citing the Hebrew text, the Hebrew Bible,
Yeah.
and then you see like differences in like the wording or an awful lot of dependency on the Greek text.
Yeah.
Whenever that was written down, no one really knows for sure, I think. But it's
You talking about
possible
the
that,
Greek Septuagint?
yeah, like how, because you have like the first five that were
That's the
the
main
original
thing that was.
Septuagint,
Yeah.
but then the rest of them, like the prophets, where a lot of the gospels are quoting from, they're not necessarily quoting Genesis, or they're quoting a lot of prophets like Daniel or Isaiah and stuff like that.
And
When
the
were
and the
those things really
Enochian
written?
literature, they also reference the apocryphal text of the Tanakh, the Book of Enoch, and
Enoch, yeah.
so um, Paul some of the New Testament relies on, and it's posting next week, but I have one where I'm going down. There's a list of texts that it's essentially what they call the Enochian literature. Gabriel Boccaccini calls it Enochian Judaism. It's kind of a term he made up just to describe Judaism that was Hellenistic, Gnostic, mystical, and it played on that the apocryphal text. Philo and his very Hellenistic kind of blend of Roman ideas and Judaism, which kind of was the stuff that made up the soup for Paul's theology, his cosmic Christ that he made up. It was kind of based in that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I see that history as being a little dubious. I This is from the introduction to the Septuagint, Ralph's Septuagint.
Mm. There's
There's a part that says, it may well be that several kinds of alterations have taken place, for the LXX went through an eventful history from the time of its origin up to the 4th century AD, when our most ancient complete manuscripts were produced. So they even admit the issue that there's a bit of a problem there. And so I talk about this in my podcast, and we get into how, like, what is it that it would take to, what does it take to like accept Christianity as true? In terms of like, when you're reading the Bible, you have to accept that the translators did a good job translating whatever they translated.
Mm.
But then you also have to trust blindly that the people that put together the text that they're using to translate, namely the Greek New Testament, the NASB 28 or whatever, and the Stuttgartensia or the Masoretic text, that those editions are actually correct. Because when you read the books on like the textual apparatus, like Bruce Metzger has a critical commentary on all of the New Testament, and he kind of goes like footnote by footnote as to like what are the other options with respect to manuscript and all the stuff that we talked about earlier about variants. Mm-hmm. So you have to then trust that the people who put together the translating texts, because they're not reading from manuscripts. I mean, Bible translators for like the NIV or the NASB, etc., they're not reading from manuscripts. They're not in museums. They're reading from the what they refer to as the primary sources, and those would be these texts. Yeah. But then, how do you know that the people who made the edition of the Septuagint have made the correct decisions? You don't know, so you have to trust that as well. And then not only that, but then you have to trust that everything was preserved right and transmitted right. And so it just gets worse the more you look into it. The less reliable it comes across.
Yeah. So interesting piece of information. Like, at least there's all the texts have variants. So yes, there's that there. One thing that they found with the oldest copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, including, they've actually found Greek versions of various books of the Tanakh. You know, most of them in the Dead Sea Scrolls were Hebrew, but they've had Greek versions of like Isaiah. And they found, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, they date it from 3 BC to 1 CE. Someone maybe put it 2 BCE to 2 CE, somewhere in there. But the you know, and the various scrolls are different datings within there because they're not all done at the same time. But they've found very close similarities between the Greek Septuagint and at least the book of Isaiah. But I mean, it's by far not perfect. So I mean, there's textual variants there. So, you know, that's, you know, it exists.
And on key passages like the virgin birth, I would agree with Tobias Singer that there's something wrong there. You know,
well, in the original Hebrew, it's Alma, which is you know, young woman, you know, young, child of childbearing age. It's not the word for virgin. So yeah, well, and that's part of the thing. And you brought this up, is that the New Testament bases itself on misunderstandings of the Greek Septuagint, yet the primary language, the lingua franca of Judaism, was Hebrew. So you're going off a secondary, not a primary text. So the New Testament is based off secondary understanding, not primary understanding. So that's where it gets the Tanakh wrong. But I mean, you know, these are all like textual critical things. I kind of want to circle back to our story and like your story, because the main thing I wanted to kind of get your story and your journey. You had said something earlier, a couple things. So you said you felt the calling to ministry, like God called you to ministry, but you don't believe that now. Would you say that you don't believe God called you to ministry, and how would you explain that?
No, not to ministry. Calling to seminary because I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to teach. Not to be a pastor.
How do you explain feeling called of God to do something, though, now that you don't believe that?
Oh, how do I explain it? I'm the kind of person that when I get into something, I really want to get into it. I really want to do it right. So I've done that with all my hobbies. And with regards to the Bible, I just felt like I was very passionate about that. And it felt like, and I still do feel like it is an important book. I don't agree with much of it, but it is an important book. It's important to at least understand it correctly, and know it well enough to be cautious of the bad that does come out of it. And so, if I think of it that way, I was just being myself. And maybe I was attracted a little bit to, like, I don't know, just maybe the charm and the style of academic, you know. I think those were my heroes, so I wanted to be like them.
I mean, you seem to still have that desire. You know, I would say that the Bible is culturally significant. So whether you believe in what it says or not, it impacts the way people behave. And so because of it impacting people and their behavior, having been a former Christian, I feel like trying to help people see truth that is not bound by dogmas that mislead people is a beneficial thing to do. That's something you guys are kind of trying to do with your podcast there.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me is, I'm trying to somehow bring just I like the taking a critical approach to the Bible and religion, but trying to put it into like ways that people can understand and maybe show more examples than most people care to show, for those that are like really into that and want to know some of the deeper reasons. Or sometimes I've said I can provide people biblical reasons for rejecting Christianity. Because through the text I'm able to show others that, hey, you shouldn't really think of the Bible the way you were taught to, mainly the fundamentalist types. So but yeah, it's I think it's an evolving channel, and we're trying different things. Yeah. And we're still learning. We have a lot to learn, and we'll see how this goes. Trying to take it one step at a time.
So you mentioned something early on that you got baptized and got involved with Christianity because you were led to feel that you needed Jesus to have a good relationship with your wife. How has your relationship improved or gotten worse? Has not having Christ as a center of your relationship made it better, made it worse? Now that you don't believe Christ is the center of your marriage, how does that affect you? Is your relationship better?
Yeah. It is far better. It is far better. I struggled a bit with perhaps, I don't know, some of those biblical principles, like you got to be like the spiritual leader of the house and the priest of the home. And, I'm the guy, I went to seminary, so I know better. Right. And just kind of like that pressure of having to be the leader. And then we struggled quite a bit in terms of like, how that dynamic plays out in our marriage. Cause my wife's very, I'm old school. I was raised old school. She was raised very much like modern day Americans, a little more open-minded, a little less macho. And so I think a lot of that was fueled by some of these Christian principles of how the home's got to run. Namely, the wife submits to the husband's leadership and all that stuff. So having overcome that, I feel like it's helped us quite a bit. In fact, I remember struggling the most when in our marriage, when doing a Bible study about a book that was teaching us how to live, how to do marriage the biblical way. And yeah, we learned the hard way. That was a bad idea.
Yeah. I would have to say I agree with that. I mean, I'm divorced now, but I have a more democratic value of relationships. I think it's two people having equal say, giving equal effort, because I believed in that patriarchal model. I think, coming from Latin America, you're probably more familiar with the patriarchal society. Power imbalances in any relationship is not good for the relationship. When somebody's got a higher position than the other, like my view of relationships have changed. On the relationship topic, within Christianity, it feels like there's a lot of performative relationships, relationship evangelism. Did you feel like there was performative relationships when you were, they served a ministry purpose, they served an evangelism purpose, a kingdom purpose. But have you found your relationships different now, in your, like, I guess, post-Christian era, or like phase that you're in? I guess I don't know how to describe it, but yeah.
Are you referring between my wife and I, or with other people?
Other people, because I'd already, I'm talking in
Uh-huh.
general. Like, so
Yeah.
in Christianity, there's fellowship, evangelism, relationships based on discipleship,
Right.
evangelism, weekly getting together,
Mhm.
that there's a level of performative relationships that is part of the evangelism of Christianity. It's one of their, tools. Have your relationships changed from performative to more experiential? Is there a difference in your relationships in general?
Oh, I see. Um, so I mean, we pretty much lost all our friends.
Yeah.
And most people nowadays just, I don't know, they don't seem to care enough to, I don't know, to do the whole visiting and hanging out. I mean, we do have some people that we see from time to time, but I never felt like I was approaching others with like this mindset, so to speak. I've always enjoyed hosting people at the house and cooking and kind of being the center of attention sometimes.
Mm,
And giving. And so that was my concept of it.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, creating
So
community is something you can always do. I mean, it's something I actively
yeah.
do. And um but yeah, I mean, it is challenging. um Part of my story is I was raised Jehovah's Witness. So my mom and sister are
Mhm.
still Jehovah's Witness, so I don't have access to them because I'm an apostate. I've been
Mhm.
disfellowshipped. um I don't, so yeah, I understand what it is to lose people. Has this affected out like your I guess your broader family, your parents and stuff like that, or have they went with you on this?
Yeah, it
Guys,
it has, because
yeah.
I've been pretty vocal about, not very vocal like I've been preaching this or anything, but people, my family, they know what's going on.
Mm,
And just a few days ago, I talked to my dad, and he got on to me pretty. He was pretty harsh with me towards the end of our conversation, which seemed to be going well up until I felt like he felt a little cornered. Then he started like attacking me personally, like, you ought to be teaching people how to live a better life and how to do things better, and instead you're preaching atheism, and other stuff he said.
mm,
So part of me wanted to be like, what are you talking about? Like, do you actually watch my videos? Like, do you know what I'm actually saying, or are you just criticizing me because you have nothing better else to say?
mm,
So it's been a little hard. Mom kind of keeps an open mind, but sometimes she's a little closed-minded. And
mm,
so I don't know. Sometimes I feel like she gets it. Sometimes I feel like she still wants to hold on to the belief in a God.
mm,
And I have a brother who's Muslim, and so we've been apart for quite a while now, because
mm,
as I was entering seminary, he was, being indoctrinated
mm,
in Islam, and they're still kind of, yeah, they're still pretty much Muslims. So
mm.
yeah, it's I very family has been, it's a little weird,
Yeah.
especially since I was the person who evangelized most of my family members. Because see, we
I mean,
grew
that's got
up
to be
Catholic.
strange. Like,
Yeah,
you're the one evangelizing them, and now you don't believe. Like, what happened?
yeah, that's exactly what they said. What happened? And I don't know if I disappointed them in not having some sort of story that, I don't know what they want to see in me, but
Mm,
it's most people just assume that something's not right.
mm,
And that's the part I hate, because people will assume things about you and not really ask you, like, are you, and be sincere in wanting to know why because they just, I don't know. We've had people that have claimed that, oh, maybe it's because, you know, he's an atheist because preaching didn't work for him, or, you know, other kind of stuff. Anything other than, hey, maybe we just don't have enough evidence to believe this to be true, and there are all these problems. It's got to be something else, and it was never something else. So that's why I started the podcast, because I want to make sure that people know, or at least I have something to point towards to say, hey, I do have reasons, and none of that has anything to do with me being angry at God. None of that has anything to do with me wanting to pursue sin. None of that has anything to do with me wanting to do whatever I want to do in life. In fact, I maybe live a life that's a little more controlled, because now I'm like, you know, this isn't about me pleasing a God. Forget about forgiveness. All that is a lie. I've got to do good now, and I got to live by the day, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. And if I don't like appreciate what I've got now, I will lose it in the near future, and that'll be the end of Mark. So it's really given me a better outlook on life, I think.
So you're an ethical atheist, and it's made you happier and have a better outlook on life, is what I'm getting.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, my journey out of Christianity, I'm not an atheist. I believe in God. You know, I chose Judaism as a cultural traditions for me and my family. Um, but I'm an academic, so I, you know, accept the historical and academic truth. But when it comes to religious denominations, I'm definitely agnostic, or I don't believe, you know, I believe there's a God, but I don't believe any single religion has it nailed down, despite, you know, like my choice for myself and my family. You know, the morality that I'm going to give my family um, is one, scientific and evidence based, but it's also the cultural tradition, um, you know, of the Jewish people. But I mean, that's different for me. You know, on your journey, you guys, you know, you've embraced atheism, but you're also ethical and moral, and you're, you know, raising your children to be good people. Um, and never should be afraid of having differences of beliefs or values. Um, you know, it seems like you're doing a good job with your children and happy with your life. So, I mean, that's good to see. I really wanted to, you know, kind of talk about our journeys, because it was interesting that, you know,
Mhm.
we both went to Covenant Church. We both were in ministry. We both went to Bible college. And it's just interesting, you know, these varied journeys. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's been good to kind of get to talk about things and hear your perspective and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I can certainly respect your position. I definitely respect it, and I appreciate it, because um, the one view that I cannot tolerate is the view where, you know, the fundamentalist view, where it's my God, it's even my baptism. You know, like the Church of Christ, they'll say that it's like, you could have come from a Baptist background or even any evangelical, doesn't matter, unless you're baptized in the by a Church of Christ. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
really, come on, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're all on a different journey, and I, you know, hope at the end of the day, you know, we're all trying to be better people. Uh, you know, try, you know, sounds like your effort is to make the world a better place, you know, and we're all doing it by different means. And I'm no way threatened by, you know, anyone. You know, I find value in not having a faith tradition and faith traditions. Um, but good people on a journey. So, and this was for me, like a lot of this is like people on their way out of Christianity. It's just providing them access to information, um, hopefully to find a more grounded view of things. things that we've kind of touched on. Things I care about is, emotional relationships, healthy relationships, quality lifestyle. And sometimes dogma and dogmatic communities and people have tactics in which they prevent healthy lifestyles, free thinking for people. So, I hope to provide, resources and stuff for people. So I've definitely enjoyed interviewing you and your wife, and I'll be posting the episodes the next couple weeks. And is there any like final things that you wanted to say here where we wrap up?
I mean, I don't really have anything in general for your audience to say other than simply an open invitation. If you want to check out my podcast, Apostate of Mind, we also host another channel called Belief Battles, where we give folks an opportunity to call and argue and present evidence and engage sort of like one-on-one that way too. And so if that's your thing, you guys are welcome to come visit us. Belief Battles. We usually do them Tuesday nights at 7.
All right.
So yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, it's been good talking to you, and you have a good evening, and thank you.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Yeah, have a good one.